Hello and welcome to the Happy PharmD podcast. This is your host, Alex Barker, and we're taking over from Chris in this episode because it's me and Alex Evans. We're talking about business, entrepreneurship, the trappings, the benefits, the love, the passion, and the curse of wanting to be an entrepreneur. And in this episode, we wanted to talk about the need for entrepreneurship in pharmacy, about some of the problems that is facing our profession, and about how entrepreneurship could be one of the solutions that we adopt to move forward and start saving some jobs as well as creating new ones. So, hey, Alex, thanks for hanging out with me. Both of us are entrepreneurs in our own right. We currently are managing our own businesses, and something that we probably should address at first is just the problems that are facing our profession. Alex, you had said before we hit the record button that so many jobs are about to be displaced. Care to elaborate some of your own opinions on that?
Yeah, and I think it's no secret to any pharmacist out there that certainly the dispensing role is being replaced very quickly, not only with robotics and mail order pharmacies, but with the expansion of technician roles. None of those inherently bad for the patient necessarily. However, this is a huge challenge and a huge opportunity at the same time for community pharmacists to step up our own game and start creating a different kind of value for patients where we had just been filling their prescriptions every month traditionally.
Yeah, I think a lot of people understand the fears. Amazon, right? Being the big dog that's likely going to change things in the coming future. But with every change, with every pendulum swinging of, the fears of technology taking over, what we have found after those times is that more jobs are often created, often ones that minimize the repetitive nature, the boring tasks. It's crazy to think about, but one day in time, there was a lot more horses in the world that used to be responsible for creating power and digging mine shafts. But through technology, we've been able to advance, and the same thing will happen to our profession.
And I've always said, my expression for it too has always been, there used to be a whole lot more typewriter mechanics in the world than there are today. It's jobs evolve.
And it's going to happen to us. The way we know pharmacy today has to change in order to adapt with the times. You had mentioned techs, and the roles expanding. I think of that technician that was faking to be a pharmacist for, 9, 10, 11 years? And had filled,
case.
Yeah, and she was in California and she filled hundreds and thousands of scripts. And as far as we know, no one was hurt because of it. We don't know that for certain, but
yeah.
Far as what the systems that were in place, no one got hurt. And I was at APHA conference, I think about a year ago, and someone had made the comment, if that isn't the biggest case study for tech, I don't know what is.
Yeah, that's true.
So it begs a question that I think the public is starting to wonder as well. What's the point of having a pharmacist in a pharmacy if all they do is just check a script? When we have technology, when we have machines that can do it arguably safer than what a pharmacist can. We have all of these problems in not just pharmacy, but in medicine. And I believe, and I think, Alex, you share the same belief, that the future has to be solved by innovative people that want to solve these problems and take the opportunity to do this in a tumultuous time. And that is by creating a business that solves a unique problem. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree with that. And there are no shortage of problems in our healthcare system to solve. And quite a few of those problems are medication-related problems. And what is definitely
No
in the public's mind is the high cost of prescription medications. And I'm not saying I have a great idea right offhand for how to solve those problems. It's more complicated than one solution ever could be. But if you look at that and medication safety and errors in the healthcare system, those two alone are just ripe with opportunity.
I agree. But what we're seeing over and over again is that pharmacists are not taking the opportunity to solve that problem. I did a little case study. So for the typical pharmacist out there, I'm going to assume that you may not know a whole lot about pharmacogenomics. Relatively new When I went into school, it was kind of like this new science, this new idea, a little bit in practice, but not widely accepted as a common practice. It's getting a lot more attention now. The year's 2020 when you're listening to this, and there's some more innovators in the space. So I had a question. Pharmacogenomics. If you had to guess, Alex, and I'm going to pretend that you didn't see my results on this on LinkedIn. Hopefully you didn't. But if you had to look at the top 30 companies that are listed in Google as some of the biggest and innovators in the space in pharmacogenomics, if you had to guess how many of the founders of these companies were pharmacists, how many would you guess?
I actually did see your results on LinkedIn.
Oh, dang it.
So I won't steal your thunder, but I was very surprised by the answer.
The answer's 2 out of 30. So roughly 6%. You would think that with the name of the field being pharmacogenomics, that there would be pharmacists involved, and there's not. And what was even more surprising to me is that the percentage was higher, but there was less than 50% of the companies that actually had hired a pharmacist to work in the company. This is a prime example of an innovative field that is trying to solve some very complex problems, and yet we aren't taking charge of the field. We're allowing doctors, venture capitalists to innovate within our own field. So one of the things I wanted to talk about with you, Alex, is the unique problems facing a typical pharmacist that stop them from innovating or going into entrepreneurship. For you, I know that you didn't start as an entrepreneur. You started as a pharmacist in the field, just like everyone else. Did you have personal or philosophical roadblocks that had stopped you from pursuing your business idea?
I mean, of course, when I first graduated, I don't know that I really had too many thoughts about being an entrepreneur, at least at the time, although I've always had that entrepreneur mindset. But with me, and especially the first kind of go at it, I think I talked about it in a previous podcast, my first business venture of the soap company and then medical writing, the biggest roadblock is just kind of it's actually your own mind more than anything else, just taking the step and doing it and actually taking the risk and doing it on a regular basis. Those aren't easy things to do, and it's always much easier, at least mentally, to continue in your regular routine. And there's this feeling that, and I think for us, when you become an entrepreneur, a kind of a switch goes off in your mind that this is actually not the case, but there's this feeling of safety by being a salaried or an hourly employee for another company, and kind of leaving, at least in my case, I went part-time, leaving some of that safety net is a pretty big mental jump to make. And slowly you realize there is no safety net. The safety net you had was imaginary anyway. And I know from being on the other end of it, even in my part-time role, I do a lot of things that would kind of be considered management consulting in that role, like adding new service lines, things like that. They're adding the numbers up, payroll expense versus revenue, just like you would any other business.
Yeah.
So it's really not there either way, but that kind of feeling of safety, to me, is one of the biggest barriers to striking out on your own.
Agreed. I think our problem is a philosophical problem. It's the way we think and what we believe. I kind of have the same philosophy about modern medicine and modern science. Everyone seems to be under the impression that, science is never wrong and what we're doing is totally right. But people so easily forget 60 years ago, doctors were smoking while delivering babies. So what we're doing now won't be right in the future.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And, cancer therapy is a good example of that. The kinds of traditional chemotherapy we're giving now, 50 years from now, will probably be considered inhumane.
Yes,
especially
agreed.
With chemotherapy. So, that's a case study of the rapid evolution of the field.
And we need to rapidly evolve, but there are so many unique problems for just the typical pharmacist to even begin to understand how to innovate or become an entrepreneur. In fact, it's so ingrained that I'll share this story. I will keep the people anonymous. So I'm currently working on developing a CE course about entrepreneurship, and we're basing this off of some texts. In my research about entrepreneurship in pharmacy, there are a lot of blog posts. There's a lot of information from entrepreneurs, but from what I gathered, the only books that are about those two subjects are written from people that have I think in their minds have been entrepreneurs within an organization. So that's not entrepreneurship in my opinion, that's innovation. You can bring entrepreneurial skills to the workplace and create new revenue streams and new service models, and that's fantastic. We need that. We need people to do that. But that's not entrepreneurism. That is creating something new from a very safe place. Entrepreneurism is seeing an opportunity and taking the risk to do it on your own and to create it and be willing to fail. And if it fails, then, that's, I suppose, your livelihood. I had a conversation with an academic who is leading a entrepreneurial program in a college of pharmacy. I initially reached out to this person because I was like, hey, kudos, way to go, teaching entrepreneurism to students that arguably need it. I believe entrepreneurism is one of the core concepts that AACP, the American Academy of Colleges of Pharmacy, wants to instill in this next generation because of our innovation problem. We eventually had a conversation, this academic and I, and this person shared with me, quote, something like, I'm one of the most entrepreneurial pharmacists you'll ever meet.
That's
And I
quite
said,
the
oh,
statement.
that's a bold statement. And it's probably not too braggadocious. Being a part of academia, most academic are not business people. Could be wrong about that, but I would think in pharmacy that is true. So I immediately followed up with, oh, that's very interesting. What is your business? And she replied with, I don't have a business.
That defies the definition of entrepreneur.
Oh, I didn't laugh. It
Yeah,
was
yeah,
cordial, but just thinking about that, we have academics who, I'll just say one academic, I don't want to generalize. I know that Jackie Boyle, one of our Happy Farm D coaches, would get on me for this because she is entrepreneurial. She has created a business as part of her academic position. But we have people that are teaching entrepreneurism and have never been an entrepreneur. That it's scary to me. But when we think about pharmacists, it is in our very nature to be very scared of any kind of risk. As you alluded to, Alex, you said one of the things that had stopped you from pursuing a business was this idea of, this could fail and I could look really stupid for making soap. The question that some people in academia are wondering is, how do we instill the core concept of entrepreneurism when so much of our education is about not taking a risk because we hold patients' lives in our hands?
yeah, and it's very true that in terms of the accuracy of dispensing medications, we don't want to take risks with administration. With the traditional idea of pharmacy, risk in pharmacy is bad. But even outside of entrepreneurship, and maybe this is something that needs more appreciation in the pharmacy field, risk is a good thing. In fact, it's an inherent part of quality improvement, as
Mm.
anybody who is in the field of quality improvement can attest to. And so that even includes medication safety. So, for example, I took the certificate course through the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. They have an open, I think they call it the Open Basic School or something like that in healthcare quality. And they talk about these PDSA cycles that are widely used. And for those of you who are maybe new to that, it's plan, do, study, act, and you keep doing cycles over and over again until something works. In other words, it's basically trial and error. And so even in the healthcare system, what I've seen even in our own healthcare system here in Florida is I've seen us approach a quality improvement project like a research project. So you have a treatment group, you have a placebo group, you do it throughout the entire hospital, you compare results, and then you stop, even if it's working. And
Mm.
that's just not how you improve quality within the healthcare system. Risk is inherent to improvement, I think, in anything. And so in the IHI course, they suggested, I believe it was multiplying by a factor of 5 each time in terms of the size of the group. So start with one nurse. What do you think about doing this instead. Low risk, the patient isn't going to get hurt because you have one person focused on that particular pilot to make sure it works and then expand it. So all of that is a very long-winded way of saying that
Mhm.
despite what we might traditionally think, risk is inherent to the evolution of the profession.
Well, it has to be. And sadly, we're all trained perfectionists.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
um, and it's ripe, as we're finding out in our research into imposter syndrome. Jackie Boyle and I, with a few other colleagues, have been working on some research projects on imposter syndrome. We're finding this group of perfectionistic people who feel like frauds. Even into your 30s and 40s, and you hear common things like, well, you never stop learning, and I feel like I never know enough. And we've got all this drive to get as many certifications as possible so that we feel qualified to do a job. When in entrepreneurism, all that is really required is, did you help someone? Did you achieve the
Yeah.
end result of what you set out to do? And in the same way as plan, do, study, act, I feel like if you have an idea and you see a problem out there that is big enough that people are willing to pay for, if you simply start doing that for free for someone and you get a testimonial, you have proof that, the process works, that you took a risk and you help someone. Now let's find out, okay, how can we produce this in scale, mass and scale, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, you're doing that with medical writing. You do that as a medical writer. You write an article for free someone, you try to get it published in an association paper or a magazine somewhere, or heck, even your local newspaper. They would love to have a pharmacist write something rather than, Mrs. Jenkins complaining about the neighborhood cats that won't stop reproducing. Like, you can get published anywhere,
You
and
can
then you
publish your own
repeat the,
stuff on LinkedIn.
yeah, for
Yeah.
free.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is show people what you're capable of and say, like, would you want this service? There's so many reasons why people aren't willing to innovate. Mainly, I find, out of just fear of success, fear of failure, fear of lost gains, fear of frustrated goal attainment in the research. I understand why so many people don't even want to try. Alex, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but I actually created the Happy Farm D first from a perspective of the way I think I can help pharmacists most is if I help them understand business concepts that I've learned and help them create businesses. And I started to help people, but what I found over and over again is people would tell me things like, I don't think this is going to work. They would start getting clients and they would start getting money.
I see.
And they told themselves the lie of failure that this will never become my full-time job.
As it was happening in front of them. That's basically what you're saying?
Yeah.
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 And what was interesting, this is like back in late 2017, I pivoted to career focused.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what we're known for now. And it's because of this major pivoting. But now what I'm finding is that the pendulum has swung in the different direction. When pharmacists do transition into jobs they really enjoy, all of a sudden they have this energy now and curiosity to want to try to create a business. And we have some of our alumni have created like Instagram pages, some have created software, some have gotten into medical writing like you, and others have created consulting businesses. So I don't know if like that's the best path to like get out of your awful job so that you have the energy to create a business. Some people I used that when I was getting bullied at my job. I used that negative energy to like fuel my fire to say, I'm gonna fight the system. I'm gonna create something so that I don't have to rely on you or deal with this injustice any longer. I don't know what the right path is for each individual person. It's different. But for a long time, I thought business is the answer. Changed, but now I'm kind of back at that.
Yeah.
Why I wanted to have these conversations with you, because I think we have to educate pharmacists for a long time about the potential of entrepreneurship. And I love what the Metapreneur conference is doing and how they're teaching pharmacists how to do mainly clinical type business models, as far as I understand. And I love what Blair is doing about preaching the gospel of pharmacy services. I don't know if pharmacists, the mass public of what's the right word? The mass of pharmacists are ready for entrepreneurship.
I think the majority have probably never attempted it, never thought about it, don't know what to do. And maybe for many of them, it might not be the right thing to do for them, but we need a small percentage who are going to do that to allow us to employ the other pharmacists in new service lines and new clinical models. And we need that to drive the industry too, as a whole, away from dispensing. Whether we like it or not, that's not going to be there. And let's face it, there's a lot of work out there to be done anyway, just in pharmacist clinical services. We just need people to create models that work financially too.
No kidding. I don't know if it's the pharmacy service thing. Is that the future of entrepreneurship? If it is, you'd think by now that a few businesses would have figured out the model and everyone would be copying what they're doing.
I think it's probably going to be some of the model. I kind of feel like pharmacists as a whole are going to need to create a lot of different types. So service-based income might be part of it, of which I guess you could put genomics in that category. And genomics is, of course, going to be huge in the future.
Yeah. Personalized medicine is the wave of the future for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you might have others that are getting into other types of, maybe they're IT focused and getting into creating new technologies that way. Wearables are a huge thing of the future. So, there's probably a lot of opportunities within technology. And yeah, I kind of see the field of pharmacy becoming more and more, even community pharmacy becoming more specialized, and the lines blurring more and more between community and ambulatory care pharmacy. In fact, I personally see them as being identical. You're seeing either way.
Yeah, except one is forced to get outside of the counter.
Yeah.
And we haven't even touched on regulation and the healthcare system and how it's broken and no one knows how to fix it. There's so many factors that impede innovation.
There are.
But really all you need to have a business is to create a system that's repeatable to draw in revenue, right? That's it.
Yeah.
You don't even need to do the work. I could create a lawn mowing business tomorrow. I don't want to be the guy mowing the lawns, but I'm going to hire the people to do it. And we as pharmacists, I've said this so many times in different ways, but everyone knows that we joined the profession to help other people. We didn't join it to make other people more money. We just want to help people. And maybe that's a drawback because I think it's a difficult leap for a pharmacist to make, to understand, well, I want to provide a service to someone else. That's how I'll get paid. It's why I see a lot of people becoming freelancers. It's what I think the clinical pharmacy service model is really all about, right? It's you as a pharmacist providing something like MTM or some other type of service where it's you talking to someone. But that's not entrepreneurship, that's freelancing. Because an entrepreneur would create that system and employ other pharmacists to in turn go do that, whatever that is. And maybe it's our mentality around just wanting to have that patient one-on-one interaction that halts us from innovating the model that we've had for so long.
Yeah, certainly for many pharmacists that would be a barrier, because if you employ other people, whether they're pharmacists or not, you're going to move from individual patient care to management of your business, management of the people who work for that business. It's a very different job. So even 99+% of companies make that mistake. You pick the pharmacist that's the best individual performer and you make them the manager. And it just doesn't work that way. They're just different. They're just different jobs.
Yeah. We could talk for a while about that broken system. But we want to, I think, encourage you, the listener, that if you've had an idea, maybe it's time to start thinking about what that is and develop the idea to actually provide it for someone else. Be willing to take the risk, because certainly that the future of pharmacy is changing. You would be in a much better position to innovate now rather than waiting until things are so bad that more and more people are becoming unemployed. We're already heading in that direction. And, the pendulum, I don't think is going to swing for quite some time. I was talking with a
Yeah.
recruiter who's had like 40 years in the industry. And I remember him telling me, I used to be able to predict what's going to happen in the market 10, 15 years out. Now I have no idea what's going to happen next year. And I
Wow.
think with the decline of applicants to the pool of pharmacy, and how multiple major employers of pharmacists have been cutting down their hours, cutting down their employees, cutting out independence, I think we're going to see this large swath of people leaving pharmacy altogether because they can't find a job. I think we're going to see a mass exodus of that. I think we're going to see some people innovate. I already see people now doing things that you heard horror stories about in school, of like people becoming chemistry teachers, which, like, I don't want to say that's not a horror story. Some people want to do that, and that's great, but as a student, you think to yourself, I'm spending 150 grand to find a job that I won't like, which will turn me into a chemistry teacher of high school
Yeah.
students.
Yeah. And which
That's
I
not
did
what
not need a pharmacy degree to do.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
you hear these stories of pharmacists doing that, and I think that's only going to become more and more common, sadly.
Unfortunately, it will. And eventually, I think some pharmacy schools will close, but that's going to take time.
Yeah.
And they will have fully saturated the market for years, probably prior to that kind of starting to happen.
So what better way to think about how you can, I don't know, use entrepreneurship to transition to a new job, or to use it to make it your main income? I mean, Alex, I think you've told me before that because of your medical writing side business, that you've been offered jobs as a medical writer.
Oh, yeah. And I would also say, without a doubt, I can get a job more easily now than I ever could have before I started the business, because I could get a job as a pharmacist, or I could get a job as a medical writer and have the experience to do so.
What better way to become indispensable just by helping other people with some sort of service, or ideally a product, because that could be sold over and over again. Yeah, so I think, just to summarize what we've been sharing, there's a lot of problems facing our profession. I don't think there's one solution, and nor do I think the big companies or the associations or the colleges are going to fix pharmacy for us. And
They're
I
not.
think things thanks, Alex.
So I'll be the first one, maybe not the first one, but I'll be one of the few to be willing to put it out there on the air. I'm tired of hearing of provider status as being the holy grail of pharmacy. I'm not arguing that it's a bad thing, but if we're going to pay our individual associations annual dues, if you are paying them annual dues to represent us, they really need to do more as a whole than just go down the entire tunnel of provider status that it's going to save our profession.
And my argument, I'm not arguing against associations fighting for provider status. I think it's the next part of the next evolution of our profession.
Certainly, and neither am I, but it being the soul.
Right. But looking at the reality and looking what other countries have done, countries such as Canada and the UK have adopted provider status. And there's actually an interesting article by APHA where they talk about provider status in these countries. And they do it from an angle of like promoting how it's influenced pharmacy. But the sad truth is that the adoption of provider status from pharmacists was so low. I may mix up the numbers here, but I believe it was something like 10% of pharmacists in the province of Alberta. Don't quote me on that. Only 10% took on provider status. And in the UK, 2% of pharmacists took on provider status. So, it's going to take decades for people to adopt this idea and to want to follow it, because it's not within our nature. I was talking with a pharmacist the other day that wanted to transition, and she said, I don't really want to do clinical services because I don't want the responsibility of someone's life in my hands. And I thought, this is how pharmacists think.
Yeah.
So I hope that you're encouraged to innovate rather than out of fear. And I also don't want you to think like, wow, I don't know where to begin. I would encourage you, reach out to me. We actually have a course. We usually give it away for free to people about starting something, about starting entrepreneurship. It's a small course, easy to finish. Happy to do that if you reach out. And you know what? I don't want to say that. That devalues what I've created. I had a course a long time ago, Alex, called
Oh,
side hustle fast track, and I sell it for like, I don't know, $300. And I don't really promote it much anymore because it's old and it's not really the focus of the company. So I don't think I'm even going to talk about it. I just want to end on, I want to encourage you, the listener, to take action, to do something, to consume more content, to learn from people who are more qualified to talk about business than Alex or myself. And I want you to think, how can I dedicate a small amount of my time, 1 hour, 2 hours a day, maybe not that much, maybe drop Netflix and think, how can I innovate? What could I create that would bring value to more people? Even if it's something as simple as just writing that book that you've been thinking about for years. You never know what could happen from it. As I know a few pharmacists who their main job is pharmacy, but they also are authors on the side and they make a nice side income from it. It is totally doable. It's totally possible. The question is, how do you get from where you are to where you want to be? And that's by simply taking some small next steps. Any final thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, one thing that might help crush that fear of not having the safety net is to think, what's the most I'm willing to risk, and to know that amount before you go into it. So is it time, money, or both? And I certainly wouldn't get on here and I wouldn't risk my own full-time job when I didn't have a business, but I would risk a few $100s. I would risk a few hours a week, even whether it's on a Saturday morning or a day that you have off. So if you kind of think, I'll just put a few hours a week and $500 into this, and then I'll reassess after 3 months. That might be a great way to take the initial first steps without it feeling too overwhelming in the beginning.
Agreed. That's why I recommend doing your service for free or giving your product away for free so that you get an amazing testimonial that you can then use for your first sale. I can repeat it over and over again. Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope it was helpful and encouraging to you. And stay tuned for our next episode next month, where we'll be talking more about pharmacy and entrepreneurship.